Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. This is the July edition of Power Hour, and should have the screen pulled up here. Garrett, if you could confirm. My name is Shane Singleton. I have with me Garrett Schmidt, and we're here to. Yeah, good morning. And we have a fun one for you today. Take two. I'm Shane Singleton. I have Garrett Schmidt with me here, so that's enough of us that you can see there. We have an Orion family update as of today in July 2024. Some of you have probably been around the Orion before, and some of you might not have been. So this is something for everyone. We're going to kind of jet ski over everything here today. Not diving too deep because you can spend a lot of time on one subject. So we're hoping to give you a picture of how the whole Orion family fits together and where you might use one Orion in an application over another one. So that's the idea. I hope that makes sense. And let's go ahead and dive in here. But let's talk about, the overview here first. We have an overview where we show the family members together, and then also a kind of a platform overview. Garrett will cover that in a second here. We're going to have our different products, the MX, the IO, the LX Plus, the SX, and the VX, and then we're going to have a little more in-depth kind of specification level family comparison at the end, kind of rehashing what we said at the beginning. But after you've seen it all, it'll be less just numbers on a page and hopefully mean a little bit more in context. So let's go ahead and hand it over to Garrett. But before we do, actually, I do want to launch a poll. So looks like we got a good number of people joined. This also allows us to have a couple more join here. So we wanted to ask the question on this poll. Poll should be open now. What your experience level is with the Orion. So there's 3 things you can see here. I see answers coming in, so that makes me feel good that the poll launched properly. Are you new? Are you a regular? Have you been using it for a long time? And this doesn't mean to say doesn't have to say that you're really good at it. I find people never want to brag about how good they are at stuff. There's always that one smart guy that proves you wrong. So even if you just are familiar with it, you could be a long-time user. So I'll give this up to 1 minute here. We're 30 seconds in. So if you are part of this, click a button, answer the question. It's going to be great. And we can kind of tailor what we're going to say just a little bit based on what we see here. So 10 seconds left. I don't know if you can change your answer, but if you're getting cold feet, go ahead and do so. Here you are. So I'm going to close this poll here. All right, last chance. Great. Okay. Close the poll. And we're going to share the results here. So this is kind of interesting here. We do have some newbies here, which is perfect. This is kind of a 101 course to what on earth is an Orion, what does it do, but also how the different models affect each other. So as you can see here, we got a pretty decent split, but there's some early users here, or beginner users here. So that's great. So let me hide this, and I'll turn it over to Garrett. Garrett, you also can confirm that it goes back to the screen.
Yes, it does. I can see it. Thanks, Shane. And
great.
Good to see the split from that poll. Gives us a good baseline for this slide. So before we get into talking about the various Orion models, I'd like to first take a minute to talk about kind of the DNA of Orion. So, we consider Orion to be a grid automation platform, and that platform consists of 2 main components that you see on the screen here, Orion OS and NovaTech Configuration Director. And for our longtime customers, you'll know NovaTech Configuration Director as NCD. So Orion OS is the embedded software that runs on all of the different Orion hardware models. It's very tightly controlled by our engineering team to make sure it's always secured and patched against any cybersecurity threats. So I think, Shane, you peeked at a NERC cybersecurity icon there. On top of the engineering aspect of it to keep it secure, we also have a wide array of configurable security features, built-in firewall, configurable Ethernet ports, a lot of different security features like that to help you secure your operations and keep everything NERC compliant. Orion OS also supports different timing protocols, so IRIG-B, NTP, and PTP for time syncing. It's reliable and precise enough to offer and capture sequence of events with a resolution of 1 millisecond. So very key aspect there. In terms of protocol, because it's sort of a core competency of NovaTech, we have a very extensive library of server and client protocols within the Orion OS. So we've got a lot of legacy serial protocols, things like Modbus and Allen Bradley's DF1 and Tejas V, all the way up to more modern things, 61850, DMP3, and the more common protocols that we see today. We also support a whole bunch of vendor and model specific communication options, things like SEL relay connectivity or even connectivity for the SNC micro AT, for instance. So those are very, very specific applications and protocols, and we've got support for those. Within our logic capabilities, we have our advanced math and logic, we have Logic Pack, and we support IEC 61131 to make Orion OS a really good solution for a variety of applications. Having the capability to do all that math and logic really allows us to go and cover everything from data concentration, protocol conversion, calculations to really offer a comprehensive grid control solution. In addition, we've got some really good capabilities beyond sort of the traditional just data processing that allow us to be a scalable front-end processor for a substation or utility SCADA system. So things like direct video support. And Shane, you can put that next one up. Direct video support, we have HMI built in, we have a tile enunciator functionality, alert and alarms via emails, and a variety of other things that really make this a good solution for data or front-end processing. Next one, Shane. We also support HSR and PRP along with our own Orion redundancy protocol. So those are things to really make a critical operation reliable. They ensure uptime and give you some different failover options. And then finally, we have a really unique feature called Lua. Lua is a programming language, and being able to write Lua scripts gives us a new level of programming flexibility and functionality. So that's something that allows us to go far beyond standard user interfaces and libraries and really be able to create a very customized solution. And then finally, bringing it all together is NCD. NCD is the programming environment for all of the Orion devices. This is really what holds everything together. It minimizes the learning curve for grid automation deployment. NCD allows you to do all your point mapping schemes, create your logic rules, mathematical functions, configure all of the different interfaces and protocols, and it allows you to do quick duplication of configuration files to do multiple devices, or even migrate from one Orion model to another. So all of this together is really what comprises the Orion Grid Automation platform. Next slide. And that grid automation platform is realized through this Orion product family. So this family, as you can see, we have a number of different Orion models, addresses many different applications based on location, size, physical interfaces, really anything you need. And using that common software platform in conjunction with NCD gives you a very unified experience. So once you learn how to program one model, you'll know how to program all of them because that interface, that experience is identical. So this range gives us a solution ranging from the smaller Orion MX all the way up to our latest Orion VX, and that's really covering every application from, let's say, from the pole top to the enterprise. So Shane, I'll turn it over to you, and we're going to take a little bit deeper look into each of the different Orion models.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. That was a good overview there. And let's dive a little deeper, but not too deep. Just a reminder to everyone online, there is a question and answer section. If this is your first time in Power Hour and you have a question, or any time in Power Hour, to be honest, you can ask it. And so you'll find your questions pane on your dashboard and you can type in what you're thinking, and we'll get back to you live or with a chat, or we'll tell you we'll get back to you later, but we will respond. So just so you know, that is there for you. So let's talk about the first member we have of the Orion family that we're listing, the Orion MX. This is really the Swiss Army knife of the group. All Orions are versatile, but this is probably the most just go anywhere type of device. It was optimized originally for the edge cases, to have as many types of things in a small and cost-effective package as possible. Like it says here in the text above, it carries expansion cards. It can do metering applications. It fits well in small substations, unit substations, and then up on a pole or in a vault. If you have questions about what a pole or a vault is, definitely ask and I can go into it more. But as you can see here, it's kind of got them side by side. You have the base model on the left, you have the largest expansion chassis in the center, and you have the 2S case on the right. I'll probably jump back here once or something as we talk about it further, but that is really the main idea. The base chassis is actually present on all of them. You can see that one on the left is actually there on the ones on the center and right. You just add expansion cards. Let's talk about the base chassis a little bit and move on. I will also point out the dimensions of this. The 7 inches wide by 6 inches deep is present for all of them. You kind of build up for the ones as you add expansion cards. All right, let's talk about it. This is indeed a Swiss Army knife as far as RTU type appliances go. This is kind of the littlest member of the family here, but it carries with it on every one 8 DI, 3 DO, and one of the DO is actually Form C, so you've got an A and a B contact on output 3. You carry a wide range power supply. There's also a low voltage option, so you're talking 12 to 24 volts. But when we're talking about wide range, we're talking 24 volts to above 240 volts, AC or DC. So it's very, very versatile. Like you don't have to worry about. It's good for standardizing on things where it just works across the whole range of applications you might need. It carries iRig. It can serve NTP. So if you deliver iRig to it, it can through network serve time to all of its friends and relays and such if you're using NTP. It carries 2 serial cards. They are software selectable for RS485, RS232. They can deliver power on pin 1 to be compatible with media converters that power off pin 1. They're spaced such that it will be able to fit a media converter everywhere there's a serial port. As we look at the expansions, that'll make some more sense. So very versatile there. You also have 3 Ethernet ports, 2 of them copper, 1 of them SFP, so you can choose your medium there. We do offer SFPs as well, and this is just so you can do pretty much anything with these 3 ports. You need to bridge them together, run them separate, and then you can maybe have a couple devices plugged into this, but all for a really low base price and in a form factor that can kind of go anywhere for you. And that USB-B port there, Type B, is our, I think it's Mini Type B actually. That's our typical interface port. That's our first time login. That's how you get into this thing. So let's go to the next slide. Well, what if you get one of those bigger cards? I'm going to jump back 2 slides just so you can have a look at those before we look at these closer. All right, so cards A, B, C, and D, or cards A and B for the center and right respectively, those are expansion cards. They build from bottom to top. You can buy one of them, you can fill them all. It's not necessarily required. You can mix and match how you would like to. So let's jump back to this page. So what we're showing you here are the cards you can get today. There are more on the way that are very exciting that I had to promise not to share much about. You can definitely ask us about it, and we might be able to tell you what's coming if you're curious, but that's more of a roadmap thing. But right here we have serial, either fiber serial or copper. They're software selectable for 232 or 485. The fiber supports echo, so there are some loop things you can do where you want to transmit down the chain if the message isn't for you. So it supports echo for fiber loops if you want to dabble in that. Then you have your I/O cards. You can actually stack these up to have a pretty formidable number of inputs and outputs. It ends up being Garrett, do you remember off the top of your head how many inputs and outputs it totals to? I don't know. That's fine if not. Several.
Which combination? Sorry.
If you just stacked it with discrete I/O, what would it be? It's fine if not. It's like 40, 30 or something like that.
Yeah, you get 40 inputs and 18 outputs, I think.
Okay, yeah, so several, quite a few for a little guy like this. And then similarly, if you stacked it with all serial ports, say they were just the DB9 ones, you would have 18 of those by the time you were done. So you can go quite dense as far as whether you want serial or hardwiring on this. So that's a powerful application on these. And then lastly listed here, we're getting into a different world here, but we do offer it. We carry meter cards. These are obviously with a split core CT for current, so you plug in and then it's like the wraparound donut CT that transduces current for you. You have 2 buses of voltage on this first card. I'm going to use my mouse here, which isn't try not to be distracted by it, but I'm circling here. This one by itself, you can order by itself. You get 2 buses of voltage and 1 bus of current with a measured neutral. However, you can also use the card on the bottom together with the card on the top, and you then have 2 slots, but it is still 2 buses of voltage, but it actually is 2 full buses of current with including measured neutrals. So you have that option as well. There are, speaking of roadmap things, other front ends for this available, including like traditional stud type CT and PT, and maybe some others as far as how you would connect to this. So this is just the first one, but it's the split core CT. And this configures within NCD and allows you to have a meter on board in your Orion MX, which is a really cool feature. So let's talk, and Garrett, I see a question over there, so flag me down if you want to answer that now or later.
Yeah,
so
I'm kind of answering on the fly here.
All right, don't know what I'd do without you. We have mounting this is actually, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. You're like, well, you got to mount it somehow, but it's actually really cool. The universal mounting system is cool. You got a sliding front-back channel on either side. So you can mount it to the ceiling, the floor, the back, the front, just kind of stick it to whatever, really. So these universal ears, very versatile. There's a version of them that comes with the 2S and 4S expansion chassis too. So that's personally my favorite because this thing just gets put in all sorts of places. So that's the most useful for me. There is a DIN rail clip. We don't necessarily use that one quite as often, but it works. And then there's also rack mounting because these still are used sometimes in places where you might consider like a full IT rack solution. So you can mount them side by side. You can mount a single one. You can then get quite a bit of density for whatever you're doing. If you do the side by side version and then have one serving the other, you can much the density for ports or hardwiring for pretty much anything. It's a pretty interesting application actually. So up to you on that one. Let's talk about though some applications. So we have touched base on this. It's pointed at smaller substations and then outside the substation as an overview. So the MX, it works great for a smaller sub where you're bringing something online that hasn't been online before. You have a few devices. You need something rugged that isn't going to run you broke. So in this device, you have, let me jump back real quick. So jumping slides here to this guy. You have, just to remind you all of these things, you have serial ports, you have networking, including baby switch on here. You have hardwired IO, you have a power supply, and a power converter. So a power supply that'll take any voltage and will 12 volts, 1 amp out for like a radio. So it saves you a lot. It also has iRig and time serving capabilities. So in a low cost offering, that's just not going to be beatable. Very useful device. And it also, you can just stick it anywhere as far as the mounting capability. Same thing goes for pole mounts. We're talking kind of outside the substation. This thing is small, this thing is rugged, and it is able to be expanded in pretty much any way you could need it to. There's also the interesting thing where you're doing OEM integration. So it's like an original equipment type thing. So one example of this that we're listing here is the S&C Micro AT. We have permission to say this because we work together quite a bit, but there's one of their products didn't speak SCADA. They've selected the Orion MX to do that for them. So they're it's for a automatic transfer switch gear, and so we wrote a protocol to speak the same language as their HMI software did from back when it was designed. And so now you can see the status and readiness and okayness of the Micro AT, which was formerly and kind of scary to be such a non-talking, because you want this thing to be as reliable as possible at, say, a hospital or an important building or application. So that has been brought online by the Orion MX. Very cool there. Vault RTUs, retrofits. Vault RTU is just a small RTU. It has a few ins, a few outs, and goes usually down in a hole. We have, you might see an open circuit board on these a lot. So an older, something like a Tejas RTU might be down there, or exposed circuit board stuff. So we can bring those into the next generation. You also can control lights and switches as a basic IO controller, kind of like something you might have done with a PLC at some point. Control some lights and switches and have them be added with smarts and logic in our logic processor. So you can retrofit in that way. And then also in the CNI space, commercial, industrial, there is an application in their power space for this. So you can speak both sides of things and have the power system be doing whatever you need it to be doing. So just briefly, a couple of specific applications. They're kind of a rehashing of this. One of them was a utility that had a budget. They had a grant. They had a bunch of substations that were going to be talking to SCADA for the first time. So they contracted with us to build small cabinets with this MX in it. And it allowed them to cost effectively bring stations online. And budget was their driver. And so that's why they chose, but it had all of these features. So they really, it was just what they needed. The second situation was kind of a pole mount thing, except the pole was in Canada and it was cold. And so they needed something rugged enough to handle that and still do all that they needed it to do. So we designed a cabinet with them. Also a well-heated cabinet, I might add, but battery backup and the Orion MX is what enabled that to be successful. So that was a good application there. But got to move on. Any questions about the MX, Garrett?
Shane, I see there's one really good question I think maybe you'd want to speak to just really quickly, is the question about inputs on cards or sequence of events. Would you maybe just elaborate on that a little bit?
Is it asking, are they sequence of events? I can't see the question.
The question, I think the way the question is phrased, I'm assuming that it's asking if the inputs on cards can trigger sequence of events or are captured as a sequence of events.
I believe the answer, sometimes SOE is really a specific meaning, so I'd have to make sure of your meaning. However,
Okay.
yes, we timestamp all of them. They can trigger other things like logical events, and they also can be archived, including on power loss. They're stored not in volatile memory through our archiving application. So the short answer is yes. When we talk about a 1 millisecond SOE, that is absolutely going to include your hard wires. So I hope that helps. And if it doesn't, shoot something in the chat and we will get back with you and satisfy all your questions, hopefully.
Thanks, Shane. All right, let's move on.
Let's move on. That's right. All right. The next thing here is the Orion IO, and I'm kind of like an enclosure nerd, so I love this thing because it lets me do all sorts of stuff and all sorts of applications. But sorry about that. Like it says here, it is a comprehensive solution, hardwired points. But what's different here is not only is it a dense I/O, we'll show you the back of it here in a second, it also has some RTU chops in it too, some logic capability, some light protocol work capability. And if there's a stack of these, this can actually, you can run unified config files, which we'll get to in a second. So you don't have a bunch of configs, you just put them all on one, and then they talk to each other. So they have the ability to simplify your life, your process. And so let's talk a little bit more about the I/O. So one of its claims to fame is it's got a miniature annunciator on it. These lights light up green for status, red for controls, yellow for different types of analogs. And you can tap that button. Don't worry, no controls can fire. It's all read only. But that screen will pop up. It will tell you whatever you've configured it to say. That's all done with an NCD, no separate utility there. There's even a simulator in NCD that shows you, bring my mouse up here, that shows you how it's going to display on the screen like this. So you're not wrapping text around and saying, oh, I've got to change the config again. In the configuration utility so you can get it right the first time. You can invert points in here too. So if you want the status, if you want to see no lights when everything is okay, you can invert all the status lights. So there's no lights when everything's okay. Some people also want to see all the lights when everything's okay too. So you can do that as well. So let's talk about, though, these are just lights. We haven't actually showed you the I/O part of it yet. So let's do that. All right. Business at the back. Connectors, and lots of them. They come in 4 slots. They include several different types, but let's see, this section here, as I wrap my mouse around, this is where your I/O wiring goes. This connector here is your combined 232, 485, and iRig connector. That's a software selectable serial. And you also have the Ethernet ports here. There's a couple of different Ethernet card options. Won't get too deep into that. And you also have a, is this a word? We'll see. Daisy chainable power supply here. So you have some extra connectors to jump a bunch of these together if you don't want to run home runs to terminal blocks for all their power. And an alarming out contact as well. So that's kind of what it looks like from the back. Let's go a little bit deeper into that though. Here's the listing of all the cards. I'm going to blast through this kind of in chunks, but you have 2 input cards here. One is externally wedded, one is internally wedded. That internal wedded card is a huge hit. It just allows you not to have to run wedding. It works pretty well in retrofit applications. And I could explain more about how the internal wedding circuit is so useful. But it generates its own wedding voltage, and then when the little hands close or open the output contact in the field, or the field contact, it allows the loop to close without an external supply. So that's really useful just for being simple. There are, bring my mouse back here, there are several versions of output contact, but let's talk about them. There's normally open electromechanical outputs, and specifically it's like magnetic coil here, just in your, like an interposing relay. On these, you have a normally open and a normally closed. We had a lot of people asking, so we brought the normally closed out rather than having to actuate them to be normally closed through logic. You actually can have them in their low energy state be closed. So that's useful for certain schemes. We also have what's called the high power digital output. It doesn't actually generate any power. It's just transistor actuated, which means it won't weld and it can break an inductive circuit. Whereas if you're doing a magnetically actuated thing, you could actually have an inductive or magnetic load on your output contacts, freeze the contact, which you would have trouble then. You wouldn't be able to break it open. And then we have a combination card that has inputs and outputs on it together. Jumping down to the analogs. When you talk about an analog, these are DC analogs. So you've got a transducer. There is the, let me get my mouse back. I don't like using the mouse this much, but it helps to point. There's the 8-channel analog input. So that one, basic analog. The flex input is a software selectable one, which means if you use voltages or currents, you don't have to move the wiring per type of connection. I really prefer the flex analog input. And then very recently, we just added what we call the high voltage flex analog input. What does high voltage mean? Well, channel 8 has a battery monitor or something monitor contact that will monitor 300 volts. That's DC though. So up plus or minus 300 volts. So you could do your battery bank or your European battery bank, measure that. And so that would give you the ability to do a little bit more with the IO. So let's talk about how to mount this thing up. All right. I don't have pictures of all of them because it was going to get to be a lot of pictures, but it's a rack mounted device. You saw that already. Jump back to here. It mounts to IT racks. Does a great job of it. You do have the ability to set it an inch forward, or you can add some more mechanical intervention here and put a standoff and move it forward further if you've got constraints for wiring space on the back. We have other ways to solve that too. We have a panel mount where you actually turn it around so the face of the unit mounts to the back panel. And then there's a little screen on the back panel for that model. And then there's the hinged model where effectively it still mounts forward, but there's this door hinge assembly that gives you space on the back panel. And then when you need to access the rear, you can actually unhook it and open it like a door. It's pretty cool. You definitely reach out if you're interested in that, because it's not like, it's a kind of an integration. There's not like a dash hinge thing on the part configurator. So you would have to reach out and ask about that solution. It's cool though. So I would if you're in the least interested. Garrett, any questions before I jump into retrofits?
I think we are good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Retrofitting, there's several types of retrofits. What's shown here is one of the D20 retrofits. If you don't know what a D20 is, that's fine. It was GE's flagship RTU platform designed by a company that GE bought back in the 90s. They're still pretty ubiquitous today. If you spend enough time in substations, you'll probably encounter one and also have the desire to get rid of it probably. So we have the ability to help you do that easily. And fit in their form factor. All of these retrofit solutions are lift and reland in their philosophy, so you can just unplug the field wiring, usually in the whole connector. Like here, these are DB25s, so you can actually pull the D-sub connector off and land it on the new connector, so that the old unit would have had those as well. And then here, these two guys are removable connectors. Most of the D20s, when they have these green connectors, are removable, and you can lift them and just re-land them on the Orion socket. So that's really nice there. So these are all the varieties of D20. We cover pretty much all of them. And then there is if you've heard of Siemens Station Manager or Telegear or LNG, those are all kind of the same thing. Siemens bought Telegear at one point, or bought Landis & Gear, and created something called Station Manager. It is now a defunct product line with just abysmal support. Like they almost just erased all memory of it. So if you have a Siemens unit and you're trying to get rid of that because it's not supported anymore, we can help you with that with a LNG retrofit. We also cover Systems Northwest, ACS, and some PLC retrofits like Allen Bradley and Schneider, or what used to be Modicon as well. And if we don't have what you need, we can actually make it. So we have the ability to do that. So that's pretty nice. Let's move to the next one though. A couple of applications here that are nice. You have the cascaded thing that I was talking about, a unified config file. that has all the device config files in it. So it's just one file to manage instead of a bunch. So that's nice. The second nice thing about it is it saves you configuration of ports. If I pull in hardwires from the second IO here, I already know about them in the head config, and I don't have to create a port between them. It already exists because the file is aware of itself. So it saves you a lot of clicks and actually simplifies your port experience as far as how you're putting things together. You don't have to create a client and a server port for every connection to the head unit. It just does it for you, which is very nice. And then you can run the IO as a client up to 600 or a master up to 600 points, that is. That means a limited number of relays you actually can head up with the Orion IO client. One time when I did this, we had to have a specific type of analogs that we don't carry. So we grabbed an analog module and loosely put, taped it to the Orion IO and had support for something in a retrofit that we needed. And I was able to head it up with the Orion IO as client using the RS-45 connector. So that is a good application. Just leaving that there though, there's, for the applications of this, you might need legacy retrofits. You might need a new shiny RTU that has a lot of IO in it, or just a few. You might have a 61850 scheme and you've got these dirty hardwired points that you're bringing into a network-based substation. The Orion IO can do that for you too. It will zip it all up basically in a nice package so you can be compliant and connect to a 61850 application. So Orion is a great way to do that, to bring your legacy equipment into your future configuration without having to just crater the whole thing and start over. So that's very nice. One more device here before I hand it back to Garrett. Garrett, did you have any questions? I'm about to jump to the next one.
There was one question on the high power outputs. We may need to follow up on that one separately about leakage current.
Yes, leakage current. One thing about the high power that I'll just mention here, it is polarity sensitive by nature of using the transistor and diode clamping protection. So all those fancy words mean don't hook it up backwards. The standard outputs, you can hook up forward or backwards or to AC and it would be okay. But for those high power cards, it's the nature of the circuit. It's an industry standard. For relays use it too. If you hook it up backwards, it'll flow current backwards. So that would be a leakage, but it might not be when you're talking about a transistor, there's another term you might be referencing. So we'll get back to you on that. Okay. We would be remiss to not talk about the LX Plus. This guy is our flagship product. He is still in the form factor of as far back as the Orion 5R. Let's look at the back of him real quick here, show you what I mean. Modular serial ports. We've added things over time for networking, some redundant power supplies and HMI, but this is a familiar form factor. If you're replacing one of those old models, it just plugs right in. There's even a conversion tool, like Garrett mentioned in NCD. You can do it in one click, although you'll usually want to add something to make use of your new features. So let's jump back here. Okay, from the front here, you have redundant power supplies. These are SCADA enabled, so you can actually pull points off of them, monitor voltage, monitor health, do things like that. You can hot swap them too. So this is really your long range, best future-proof-est solution. Making up words today, but you have options here for low or high voltage. Note the cutoff change is at 48 on this one, which is a little bit different than in the past. That's just by nature of the modular supply is different than the old CPX. So the 48 volt cutoff, I would point out to you. Make sure you also can spec one of these as high voltage and one of these as low voltage. So you actually have the widest range possible on these. These are higher performance. The MX, they can support more power, and of course they're SCADA enabled and fancy things like that, as is fitting to a flagship product. Jump into the back, you have 16 serial cards plus a 17th modular card with a few more features on what we call port B. You have RS-232 card, you have an RS-485 card, ST fiber card, VPIN fiber card, and there's an isolated version of the RS-232 card that's pretty cool. You can withstand, these are all surge protected, but we even have a more advanced one. They all can withstand an 8 kilovolt shock. They call that human safe ratings. The more advanced one is 2 kilovolts opto-isolated, so you could leave 2 kV on your comm line and this thing wouldn't care. So it's you don't see a lot of these killed on the comm line. So that's something to consider for like a reliability thing. You have built in, let me point here, HMI audio out. You have USB ports next to your Ethernet ports here. So you can just plug into this as an HMI. It'll serve locally, has a Linux-based cybersecure interface. So you can actually have a local HMI straight out of this thing or put it on a big TV if you wanted to. And you have these, what we call Nova cards here as well. All right, let's talk about the Nova cards. There are 5 of them. 0 and 1 are related. They just, the 0 removes the SFPs. Just lowers some cost for you there. Gives you 4 in, 4 out on both of them. And this RJ45 port, you can add the SFPs on NC1. NC2, you want a basic Ethernet switch in your cabinet. Why not throw it in the RTU? This is also great for those cascaded applications we showed earlier. If you have half a dozen or a dozen Orion IOs, you can plug them straight into here and just kind of hard address everything. So it's a secure way where you're not doing a lot of networking, but you have a network connection in your cabinet to just Orion. So it's a great way to push that unified NCD file. NC3 is the hardware redundant card, so you can do PRP and HSR. If you know what that is, that gives you redundant networking. You also can do it with software on, say, the NC1. So you have a couple options for that. And if you're getting rid of some old 2030s or 2032s that had statuses on them, we can do 16 statuses on the Nova card too. So that's a great, just condense what you're doing in your straight into your platform for automation rather than having a hardwired IO. So that's really nice. Let's see. All right, we're not going to jump to the SX just yet. Applications here would be really your substation. This thing has the greatest range in that you can use it for the greatest number of things. It's reliable. It's got the redundant power supplies. It's got the most service hours out there of any of our models, this and its predecessors. This is really the tried and true. And it can support, aside from this last thing that Garrett's going to share here in a moment, it can support the most connections too. So like a ton of IEDs. So you get a lot for your money on this one, and buy as little or as much as you need. So that's why it's right in the middle of our lineup, and it's also our flagship product. So let's talk about the SX, which this slide jumped me. This, for lack of a better term, think of it more like an LX than like an MX, but this is an Ethernet only device. Yes, it has a serial port, but that's just in case you needed one serial thing to like monitor this or something. It's got one input and one output. It's not an IO device. And it's got your display port and HMI. This is the Orion SX, and it's actually its own product. This is not an MX, and its job is to more enterprise solutions. It allows you to connect to a large number of devices, but this would assume you don't really need the Ethernet, or you don't really need the serial connections if you have one of these. These also are starting to crop up in like head ends of medium to small utility SCADA systems. So they'll put these actually in the office, in the IT room. So you don't need the full substation comm processor. You want a head end that's powerful, but you don't want the full size box. This is a great solution. Just looking what it has, it's got the same networking capability as the MX, one in, one out, iRig, RS-232. This is a limited 232 port, not quite as fully featured as the other ones, it has 3 pins instead of 5. So you can do most things with this, but I wouldn't spec it for a serial application on purpose. You would use something else if you needed serial on purpose. And it's got the HMI module on here, just like the LX Plus does, allowing you to direct drive video, as well as all of them can network serve video, though, including the Orion IO. All right, mounting it. It mounts a lot like the MX. You have those universal ears that'll mount to anything. Ceiling, floor, back, front. It's also got rack mounting ears, and there's some panel mounting things you can do, DIN rail mount. So this thing can fit pretty much anywhere, and if you wanted, you can fit a lot of them in a compact space if you had a reason for doing that. So, all right, this thing actually had its birth in a customer wanted a did H in their substation, so they didn't want to have computers in there, and they didn't want to have actual comm processing going back and forth to each HMI. This allowed it over network. These things can, from their local HMIs, just connect to the RTU and look at it, like on the Orion OS. We used to call it the web GUI, but Orion OS, right? It's the web page accessible controls. You can look there with this, and so they had these in a bunch of different bays, so there were HMIs all over the station. So a dedicated HMI processor at a large station, you might not want to have your Orion LX Plus, which is doing all the comm processing, do your HMI as well, so you can have a segregation of duties. So this is a good lower cost version of that. And then you can do SCADA master, like I mentioned, on small utilities, and then kind of other things, right? You can make it do multiple things like the LX Plus, just not as much for serial. All right. Any questions there, Garrett? I think I got to hand this to you here pretty soon.
No questions so far. Looking good.
Wow, that's either really good or not good, so we'll see. All right, before this, I did want to throw a poll up here. This one will be a little quicker. So kind of in a transition here, we've talked about all but the VX, so I'm going to launch a poll here. You can click multiple of them if I set this up right. The question is, which members do you have experience with of the Orion family? So go ahead and click one or two of these. I don't know if I said to pick a number exactly, but go ahead and do that. This is going to be a little shorter poll. Which one of these have you touched before? I guess you have experience with all of them because of this presentation, and this is at the end, but I kind of meant the actual using it. I threw the legacy option in there because I think a lot of you longer time users would have been using Orions for longer than the modern family has been here. So, all right, just a few more seconds here. All right, last chance, going once, going twice, closed. All right, and sharing that, you can see what people have experience with. The LX Plus is the king here, and legacy. So that platform, Garrett, appears to be, the LX Plus 5R, and in between is the experience. All right, so with bearing that in mind, you got to go to work on that 6% number down there. All right.
Well, it's a perfect segue into the newest member of the Orion family. So this is the Orion VX. This is a virtual grid automation solution. It runs as a virtual machine on an Intel processor-based server. We introduced this earlier this year at DistribuTech, following the VPAC Alliance's vision for the digital substation. So if you're not familiar with the VPAC Alliance, that's Virtual Protection and Control. It's a consortium of different industry leaders in the utility space that have come together to kind of cast a vision for what a substation may look like in the future. Also, VX can be used as a front-end processor at an enterprise level, installed for data aggregation, or even a SCADA system for smaller utilities. And we've talked about some of that functionality with the previous versions. So Shane, next slide, please. So if you're new to the concept of virtualization, we'll just kind of go over this really quickly. Traditionally, every function in a substation is handled by a dedicated device. So that's kind of the hardware solution to the left. So you might have an RTU, a protective relay, meters, IDs, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that works well. It's the way things have been done for the past however many years. It takes a lot of effort to design, install, and maintain. So the VPAC Alliance recognized this and has come together to cast this idea for virtualization. Virtualization abstracts the software functionality of those dedicated devices and puts them on a server. And so that's kind of what you're seeing there on the right. So you've got a server that's running a hypervisor, which is a sort of management piece of software that goes in between the hardware and those virtual devices or virtual machines. Today, Orion VX requires that hypervisor is ESXi, which is a VMware product, which was recently acquired by Broadcom. There are other hypervisors available in the market. We may support those in the future as roadmap items for Orion VX. So on top of the hypervisor, you can create multiple virtual machines. Those are the digital representations of those physical devices that are on the left. And the number of virtual machines you can run on the server depends on the hardware specs of the server itself. So in terms of memory, number of CPU cores you have, CPU speed, how much storage you have, things like that. So bigger server in terms of hardware can run more virtual machines. So following that BPAC concept I mentioned, the idea is that a virtual Orion or Orion VX and a virtual protective relay, for instance, could be operating on that same physical server. So now you've taken two physical devices and you've condensed that down into one physical device. Next slide, Shane. So in terms of deployment architecture, there are a couple different ways you could deploy this. A simple one is a single server deployment. So you have one physical server, it has just a hypervisor running on it and some number of virtual machines. A more complex system would have a management system for multiple servers running in what's called a cluster. This has some advantages because now you've got this, in this case, we've got the vCenter server managing a vSphere cluster with a number of server devices running ESXi and a whole bunch of virtual machines. The advantages here is you've got more functionality for redundancy and failover, things like that, and sort of a management platform. So think like you have a primary system maybe running in a substation and potentially a disaster recovery system as an example. Very simple. Next slide. So Orion VX offers a variety of redundancy and failover features. I kind of touched on those. So Orion OS, as part of the platform, has an active standby redundancy capability already built in. That's also available on the LX Plus and some of the other Orion models. The standby, in this case, the standby Orion monitors the active Orion and triggers a switchover if a failure is detected. On top of that, with Orion VX, we have the ability to leverage vSphere's high availability functionality. This can detect hardware or virtual machine failures and then restart virtual machines on other servers in the cluster if you need to. There is, in this case, some downtime associated with that as the new machine, virtual machine, needs to boot up and take over. VX could also use vSphere's fault tolerance capability, kind of creates a shadow copy of an active virtual machine on another server, monitors for failures, and if the failure occurs, the fault tolerance triggers the failover very, very quickly. So it's essentially seamless. Seems like, you know, from a top level that the fault tolerance would be the way to go. There is more management and cost associated with that approach. So it kind of depends on the needs of the application if you can go with high availability or fault tolerance. All right, Shane, next slide. So here's a conceptual diagram of how we would use Orion VX in the digital substation. So you'd have probably two servers, one as a primary, one as a backup, so that you can take advantage of some of that redundancy capability. Running a virtual RTU and maybe a relay, you're going to have a switch in the network as well as a PTP clock for time. And generally, everything's going to be connected to merging units out in the yard to do all of your AC measurement and control, physical control capability. Those substations are then connected back to the enterprise in a very traditional setup. So you can see there are fewer actual physical devices installed in the substation in this concept. Next slide. You can also use Orion VX as a virtual front end or as a front end processor. So think that this is running more in the IT realm, I guess you could say, at the enterprise level. Most likely, you're going to still have multiple servers. We're running a cluster, collecting data through a variety of COM paths. LTE could be direct connection, whatever. to a whole bunch of devices. Could be to substations, could be to pole top devices, could be to edge devices, IoT devices, etc. Next slide. And then lastly, using Orion VX as a SCADA master, or sort of an all-in-one solution there, where it's actually doing the collection of the data as well as presenting HMI screens. Next slide. So that's a very quick overview of Orion VX. There's a lot more detail to that that's going to be available soon, as we are doing the formal market launch in the coming weeks. So you'll see a little bit more detail on that and have the opportunity to get an up-close look. But to summarize today's presentation in terms of the product family, what you need to take away from this, especially if you're new to the Orion products, is that we've got a number of different variants that Shane's walked us through in some detail for pretty much any application. The thing that remains common across all of these devices is, of course, the software platform, Orion OS and NCD. So if you know how to program one, you can program them all. And as far as making a decision on which Orion model is right for me, we've got some basic decision criteria here in this chart. If your application is a mix of maybe some conventional I/O, some serial, and some Ethernet for a small substation or a pole top application, the Orion MX is probably the right choice for you. If you have a lot of conventional I/O, relay, digital outputs, digital inputs, some analogs, things like that, you're going to want to go with the Orion I/O. The Orion LX Plus, as Shane coined the term, is the flagship product, really designed for both new and retrofit substation applications, has built-in HMI capabilities and redundant power supplies for more reliability. The Orion SX is one of the newer models that we've released to the market as well, and that's really the right choice if you're looking at primarily protocol conversion, data aggregation. You need an HMI server in the substation. That one, I almost look at it as a substation rated PC, box PC. It's not a PC, but you kind of think of it that way. And then lastly, Orion VX, our newest member. It's the way to go for substations of the future, large scale front-end processors. Supports, as you can see, the highest device and point count of the family, and will be scaled up in the future as we see the grid needing to be able to connect more and more IoT type devices. We expect to continue to expand that. Shane, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm going to check the questions here if you have it.
Okay, yeah, there's a few questions you can answer probably in the background pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, so question is, will Orion VX provide a domain controller, AD, MFA, role-based user profile, privileges, and syslog capabilities? I think the answer generally to that is yes. Orion VX is the same operating package that's on all of the different Orion models, once again, so we've really just abstracted that from the hardware. So it's the same Orion OS, it has the same syslog push capabilities, the same radius and Active Directory capabilities, all the same protocols, barring serial, of course, on a server, and all of the different user profiles and login versions are all the same.
All right. Thank you for answering that.
Yep. And so, Shane, you want to bring us home in the remaining minute here?
Yes, we have 5 seconds to finish here. Let's talk briefly. Don't forget that we have a customer community site. We have all our drawings, access to power hours like these, and we have other training events, including some Spanish-speaking stuff as well. So if that is helpful for anybody listening there, we have Spanish-speaking stuff like manuals too for you. And yeah, don't forget to check out Power Hours there. If you have, you can look this up, and you can request access to this as well if you don't have it. NovaTechAutomation.com/community. And you can also get links to latest software and manuals on here if I didn't mention that. All right, so that was the community. This is the support site. They're linked together, but they're slightly different in role. You can get latest firmware's maintenance releases, which are not majors, so you won't really hear about them unless you go looking. But they fix minor patches, often for specific customers, and if it's major enough, we'll roll it into a major release. So right now, for instance, the distro on the Orion is a 10.x firmware, so like the X is a number that shows where we're at. I think we're on 10.2, right? Or is it 10.4? I forgot, Garrett. And
we're on 10.2.
Thank you, 10.2, indeed. We're on 10.2 right now, and so that would be your latest two. And you can find other two. As far as managing your Orions, there's also a file share utility on here as well if you need to share files to and from NovaTech. Also, you can book time with me or other members of the team. Spanish speaking available as well. You go to booking.novatechautomation.com and set a time right to my calendar. This thing frequently reminds me to keep my calendar updated, in fact, because they do come in quite a bit. So you can book a time for your application to discuss it. All right, just want to take a short moment here to say thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining, and we'll be following up with a recording of this and any questions that have rolled in here right at the end. Thank you so much from the NovaTech team, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks all.